So I have prepared a much simpler presentation than Eric's, meaning by that as I sent you the abstract, actually I realized that basically this is too much for 25 minutes plus 10 minutes of discussion. So I thought that for today it would be just enough to clarify what this long title means. And so this is what I'm going to do today, basically. What does it mean seeking for Jesuit psychology, and what are these topoi, what are these manuscripts of the Collège de Clermont, and why do I take into account only this short amount of period, 1564, 1610 in particular. This is, I think, already a big project for the time we have at our disposal. I won't have many quotes. I'm just basically telling you the story that lies behind another project that I'm writing a book actually on Jesuit psychology as taught and transmitted from the College de Clermont, the Collège de Clermont, the Jesuit Parisian College, from its foundation, 1564, up to 1610. We will see why 1610 in a few minutes. So, what is this project about? This project of my book, actually, which I hope I will finish by the next year. My focus is that, of course, of working on the scientia, the anima, on psychology and doctrines on the soul in general. Where? At the Jesuit College of Paris, as I already said. And this is something that I want to clarify, why I want to do that. And after other studies on this, actually the answer is yes and no. Yes, because there are plenty of excellent historical studies concerning this Jesuit college, the first Jesuit college in Paris. But these studies do not focus at all on philosophical doctrines. They are mainly historical works that focuses on academic practices. One example, the best, is Guillaume, of course it's not coming to my mind now, it's a French book, oh God, how it's called? Du Collège de Clermont au lycée Louis-le-Grand, basically. This is the title. In this moment, the name of the author is escaping me, which is a big work in 3 volumes, but there is nothing about philosophy. It's just concerning, it's very useful anyway. It concerns the names of the protagonists of the history of the college from its foundation up to the 18th century. The Collège de Clermont that later on was transformed by the king in the Lycée Louis-le-Grand, which is actually that what you can see in the picture on the right, on the extreme right of this slide. As you can see, this is today it still exists, the Lycée Louis-le-Grand. If you have taken a walk along the Rue Saint-Jacques in Paris, just in front of the Sorbonne, for sure you have walked past it, and maybe you have noticed that. Now it's much bigger than when it was just the Collège de Clermont, because as they started, the Jesuits were very poor, and it was just a little school, sort of. So I'm so sad that I cannot remember the name of the guy, but just to say that there are plenty of excellent works, historical works, but not, I see that someone in the chat is suggesting me. Yes, Gustave Dupont-Ferrier, exactly. Thank you very much. Yes, Dupont-Ferrier. Yeah, but there is nothing on the kind of teaching, on the kind of philosophy they were doing. And that is why I decided to focus on them. Of course, this is not the only reason why. And when, from the foundation of the college up to the first printed book issued at Clermont, which is the De Corpore Animato by an Italian Jesuit teaching in Clermont, Girolamo Dandini. But we are going to talk about him a bit later. I just want to say something to comment on the other picture. This is, of course, not a photo I have taken. This is the first page of a manuscript, which preserves the transcription of the first course taught in Clermont, which is exactly a Compendium de Anime by Juan Maldonado, a Spanish Jesuit. I will say something more about Maldonado in a few minutes as well. So the overall project focused on this object, which is concerned with Paris and in this precise period of time. What do we have to understand by scientia de anima? Actually, many things, and these many things are those that comes out from the manuscripts I've studied and that I'm currently studying and that I plan to include in my work. Why there is nothing on the philosophical doctrines taught in Paris? The answer is straightforward, because, as I already mentioned, manuscripts, basically apart from the first course taught there by Juan Maldonado and the book I was mentioning by Girolamo Dandini, all the other sources are still unpublished. So they usually have a look like what you can say in this current slide. They are manuscript text. There are many, and they are actually disseminated all over the world. So there is a lot of work to do, actually. What do we have to mean by scientia de anima? First of all, you have to think about what kind of text. Well, this scientia de anima is usually preserved, transmitted by commentaries on Aristotle's De Anima, for instance, but not only. Actually, we find Jesuit doctrines on the soul also taught and present in other kind of texts that are not just De Anima, annotations in De Anima, but also something that actually at a certain point becomes a genre, a real genre, like it is the case of the De Anima Intelligente, De Origine Natura et Immortalitate Anime, which is the text taught by Maldonado, which now is edited, I edited, and it is published, actually. So if you are curious, I will give you the reference. The Origine Natura et Immortalitate Anime is the only record we have of the first classes taught in Paris by this Spanish Jesuit already mentioned, Juan Maldonado, in 1564. He commented on the entire books on the whole De Anima by Aristotle, but we don't have such a commentary. What has come down to us is solely this shorter compendium, this synthesis that apparently he would have written for his students, a synthesis that actually has circulated not only in Paris, also outside Paris. The only two manuscripts that I know are preserved, one in Paris at the BNF, and it is you can see the first page on the left in this very nice French Gothic, and the other one instead has been transcribed by a Swiss monk. We know everything about this Swiss manuscript. We don't know anything about the first one, the French one. But it's better that I stop talking about this because I could get lost in philological details. I spent so much time working on this text, so I could annoy you, bore you to death, basically. We have only two manuscripts. Nevertheless, we have also some traces of the fact that this manuscript was these doctrines was kind of popular, and that Maldonado's classes were very successful. What is this text? This De Origine Natura et Immortalitate Anime. I have the feeling, I have the idea, which is what I intend to defend as well in my book, that Maldonado originated a real trend that of actually, after discussing Aristotle, considering the overall sense of the anima from a broader point of view. and to focus mostly on what is really important, on what really matters, namely rational soul, by putting aside all the rest. So, for instance, in this compendium by Maldonado, you don't find a word about sensitive soul, vegetative soul. You only find a tract on the main features of the anima intelligente, as Jacobus Bovasa, also known as Valentinus, a Portuguese Jesuit that actually took the chair of philosophy after Maldonado, as he did himself. After commenting the entire De Anima, he produced this very long text, unlike Maldonado's, called the De Anima Intelligente. I'm almost done with the transcription of this text. It's really interesting, and I'm including it. I plan to include it in my book as well. Then I also would like to say something about these course notes and this printed text. As I mentioned, because this is something important when people ask me, why do you work on this stuff? Nobody knows Valentinos, of course, nobody knows Maldonado, or almost. Maldonado usually is the more famous of these guys I'm mentioning, because he was also a Biblist, an erudite of his time, but still, usually everybody knows who Suarez is and ignores all these others. Why to work on them? I have the feeling that they were kind of popular in their time, not just because I confine myself to what their contemporary were saying about them, but also I have the feeling that they have left a trace in their time and even after. We find traces of their teaching and their doctrine circulated all over Europe. Now, please don't laugh. I made this very simple map that I'm presenting you with. We find actually traces, records of the Parisian Jesuit teaching all over in Europe. Here I'm just giving you a few examples, but my corpus of manuscripts from Clermont actually is much bigger. I have many other. I'm just presenting you with some examples. There are Jesuit Parisian manuscripts in Stockholm, in Gotha, in Germany, in Dillingen, in St. Gallen, in Switzerland, in Rome, and Cesena. Of course, also in Paris. But I excluded Paris by purpose. And on the right, you can see instead the only printed book issued from the College of Clermont by Dandini. The title is a program. It's almost longer than the title of my talk today. The Corpore Animato Libri, 7 books, and that's crazy, right? Because this is supposed to be a commentary on the soul. Instead, we have 7 books and not the usual 3 books of the De Anima. Why is that? Because Dandini actually, this is a proof of force. He wanted to show that the quality of the teaching of the Parisian College was great, was the best, and therefore the Jesuits were able to provide their students, and not only their students, but actually to educate everybody with an entire history of the De Anima commentaries. We find in here a book on anatomy, a book on physiology, and so on and so forth. The commentary on the De Anima we find only in the 3 last books. It is a proof, showing off of erudition by Dandini. We find the text in Greek, in Latin. This is something completely different with respect to the manuscripts I was showing you before, that are basically the recordings of the students from the lectures they were listening to, either dictated by the teachers or notes, shorter synthesis of the courses that were circulated after the classes and copied. Why am I saying this? Just to say that even if we don't know if today the memory of a Maldonado or a Dandini or a Valentinus is completely lost, this is a phenomenon that actually interests the entire 16th century. We have to remember all the time that in the 16th century, actually, handwriting and was actually the most common way to diffuse, to transmit knowledge. Printed books were basically an exception and not the other way around. So if we don't know them today, this doesn't mean that they didn't count anything. This doesn't mean that they did not exert any influence in their time. So I'm making some advertisement for that people too now. Great. And then what are exactly the texts I am including in my work, in this project? As I already mentioned, I edited this text by Maldonado, which is extremely interesting. The title is De origine, natura et immortalitate anime, which is the only record I recall once more of the first teaching by Maldonado, which focused on the soul in Clermont. I have edited this text. This text counts like about 40 folio. It's not very long at all. Valentino's is much longer, but it is incredibly interesting. So to make some timeline, 1564, the Parisian College opens its doors, and Francisco Suarez that very year, as Eric was mentioning, instead enters the Jesuit order in Salamanca. He starts studying by the Jesuit. Then Jacobus Borrasa, the Portuguese, the second professor that actually takes on the chair of philosophy in Paris. So I am focusing on parts of his De Anima and on this tract, De Anima Intelligente. There are many more manuscripts, but I'm focusing just on these two for philological reason. I found these are the best. Then finally, a French one, Jean Chapelier, who has commented as well on the De Anima. This is the less interesting, I must say. And then Girolamo Dandini, who has plenty of manuscripts actually all over Europe. There are so many, I am not sure yet about which one is the best, which one I will consider. He comments on Aristotle at the end of the 16th century and then produces this huge monumental work, the De Corpore Animato, that counts something like more than 3,000 printed folios. It's really monstrous, really monstrous. These are the texts I am mostly focusing. So these are the texts I'm focusing on, and these are the names of their authors. I wanted to read them because I don't expect any of you to be familiar, so I wanted to mention them once more. Let's see. Yes. I mentioned topoi in my title, not just manuscripts. So mapping topoi and mapping manuscripts. Manuscripts provides me with a textual base, but actually my guide is always that of following certain topoi that we find in these manuscripts, and that make me think somehow that all these Jesuits were pretty not conformistic, but that they had like a plan they were following, so to say, because there are some elements that are really current in this De Anima Intelligenti, and so on and so forth. What are these topois? They insist a lot on the nature of the agent intellect as something which is unique. We have only one intellect. The Aristotelian distinction between agent and patient intellect is actually something that they tend to abolish, that they don't want. But they all agree upon this. They indeed emphasize the active nature of the intellect or mind. So there is only one intellect, not two, and this one has an active nature. The nature of abstraction, of course, because this depends on the nature of the intellect itself. The intellect is described mainly as an active power, thinking, namely performing its own particular activity independently from the body, independently from the sensible species, just to be more precise. A certain anti-Averroism, and this is an important point. This is an important point because basically it's very interesting how they have anti-Averroes. They don't quote mainly Averroes in their courses, by responding to a certain idea. You won't mention your enemies in order not to raise the curiosity of your students. Really a censorship, a super censorship. But when they do talk about Averroes, they do it in a brutal way. They really make an abuse of the poor commentator. What does this mean? How do they do that? They mainly focus, as I said, on the active feature of the mind, but also they focus all on the intellect's immateriality, which is what allows them to talk, to defend the soul's immortality. I recall something, namely that the 16th century begins with this dramatic event that is the Apostolici Regiminis, this papal bull, which actually was recommending teachers of philosophy not to teach their students that philosophy on the one hand and theology on the other. They had to go hand in hand, and they had to teach that the soul's immortality is not just something we believe by faith, but also something which is teachable, which is defendable through philosophy. And this is actually something that all these Jesuits I have mentioned apply, they follow it ad literam, basically. I have the feeling that this has influenced the way they were doing philosophy, the way they were talking about the soul as well. And that is also something that might explain why there is this flourishing of tract called the anima intelligente or the anima razionali, not just in Paris, also outside Paris, but I will talk about this later. And of course, the last element, one of the last elements, I'm just mentioning some topoi. I could not make the list longer for time reasons. A certain and very bold anti-Thomism. In certain cases more, in certain cases less, of course. We are talking about manuscripts, texts that we have not, mainly we are talking about manuscripts, texts that we have not fought, that were not ready for publication. Maybe this made certain Jesuits bolder, maybe, like it is the case of Maldonado, that has really no problem. Maldonado, the first Jesuit lecturing in Paris, when he, in his compendium on the soul, goes against Thomas without any problem. Unlike Suarez, for instance, who in his printed De Anima, actually, every time has to mention Thomas Aquinas, he does it with in a very reverential way. And yes, I agree with Aquinas. And then, as we all know, he goes against him, right? In an implicit way. Certain examples of this anti-Thomism, the way they conceived of the soul, for instance. These Jesuits are all defending plurality of the form. So anima forma corporis, it's a nice idea. They talk about it, they don't defend it. They all talk about the presence of many souls of many parts of the soul divided actually. They resuscitate as well the forma cadaveris, which is something that comes down from the first the first forms of anti-Thomism, and even before Thomas Aquinas, actually. And they have all a certain, and to this is attached a certain conception of primary matter. I don't have the time to expound more on this, but if you want, if you're interested, we can do that in the debate. As I told you, I didn't want to bore you, nor I didn't want to present you with many quotes. I'm just showing you this, just to let you understand better what I mean when I talk about topoi, namely elements that are current in this kind of text. Maldonado on the left, Dandini on the right. Maldonado in this first compendium on the soul taught in Paris, 1564. He destroys the distinction between agent and patient intellect, which we find in Aristotle, with a lot of arguments. The first is very nice. It goes as it follows. Such a distinction that we find in On the Soul by Aristotle is not an Aristotelian distinction because it's useless. We cannot argue philosophically that there is something such as an active intellect, because we can actually say that when when Aristotle talks about these two components, these two supposed components of the intellect, is talking about the senses and the intellect, but the intellect as a solely active nature. I will read the beginning of the text. To acquire a perfect understanding of both material and spiritual substances, our soul, by nature, possesses two different cognitive powers, one which cognizes only by being passive, the senses, and one which, whilst cognizing, is never passive, the intellect. The first power is called by Aristotle passive intellect, the second agent intellect. So the distinction still is Aristotelian, it seems so, right? Aristotle later uses the same argument to claim that the agent intellect is immortal, while the passive intellect is mortal. And that is what creates a problem, because Maldonado wants to argue philosophically for the soul's immortality, so he needs Aristotle on his side. Had he not called the senses passive intellect, he would have not said it is mortal. The other intellect instead is a power of the rational soul, and it has nothing in common with the body. Moreover, in chapter 4, Aristotle calls that intellect, which everybody calls passive, apathe, namely impassive. In the same place, he says that the agent intellect always is impassive. Thus, he calls agent intellect the intellect which everybody calls passive. So basically, everybody has always made a mistake as they were reading Aristotle on the, of course, the reference is the most famous chapter 5 of the first book on the soul. If this is not bold, I don't know what being bold means, to arrive to the point that to say that Aristotle actually create a non-Aristotelian distinction by himself. And this text is actually taken on by later at the end of the 16th century by Dandini, who makes exactly the same claims. There is only the intellect. When we talk about agent or passive intellect, we are making a mistake. The intellect has only an active nature, and its activity is only one, thinking. There is nothing as, we cannot distinguish, you cannot detail the process of abstraction as everybody was doing in the before. And something interesting about this text that I'm not reading because I'm very scared to run out of time is that that actually Dandini attributes already to Alexander of Aphrodisia such a position. Now, why I said this is interesting, because the text that Dandini quotes, and Maldonado doesn't quote anyone on the contrary. This is interesting because if the goal is that of arguing for the soul's immortality, well, the text by quoting Alexander, the most famous moralist commentator of Aristotle, it's already something striking. And not only this, but the text that Dandini is quoting is referred to the agent intellect, which is God. So this creates some problem. Actually, it's disturbing, at least. It's at least disturbing. But what I wanted to show you, I wanted only to bring to your attention the fact that certain elements are really current, like, for instance, in this case, the abolishing of the usual distinction of intellect in these two components, agent and passive, because the intellect, they say, is only and all the time active. Now, what this means actually is highly problematic. This means that we are all the time thinking, that we have all the intelligibles at our disposal from the start. This is a question that actually I plan to discuss thoroughly in the book I'm writing. Then, to conclude, I'm moving toward the conclusion of my talk. I said that these topoi are actually to be found everywhere, not only among the Parisian Jesuits. What is interesting is the text by Maldonado, which is the first I edited, is one of the first texts on the scientia de anima written by a Jesuit, or at least transmitting the thought, the teaching of a Jesuit. in the 16th century, at least among those I know. But these elements are actually to be found in many other texts. The usual comparison, the usual term of comparison is Francisco Suarez's De Anima, which actually Suarez did not publish as he was alive. He wanted to publish it, but because he had lectured on the De Anima, he was at his first teaching appointment in Segovia in 1572. But then actually the text was published posthumous in 1620. Why usually Suarez is considered as a term of comparison? Because basically we find these elements, these topoi, active, present in his text, in this text as well. Elements that we find in Maldonado, that we find in Landini, that we find in Chatelier, in all the people I've mentioned. So, sorry if I go back. So basically we don't have to consider them as super original elements in Suarez De Anima. They were already there. It's just that we don't know them. We don't know them because they are preserved. They were transmitted in texts that still are unpublished. For instance, it is the case of the topos of the complete lack of dialogue, of communication, as James South has called it in a very nice paper. The lack of communication between what? Between the intellect and the senses, the sensitive faculties, the phantasms, and so on and so forth. This is something we find very precisely already in Maldonado's text. I'm not reading the quote, I'm just showing them to you. Then I will share the PowerPoint with you as well. I feel the clicking of time running, passing. But also Maldonado claims the same thing. I'm not reading Suarez, I prefer reading with you Maldonado. Let us give him the word. The agent intellect cannot make the material form spiritual, even if they could become spiritual. For either he can transform them or he cannot. If he cannot, how does he make them spiritual? If he can, why is not the present intellect doing it, since it is as spiritual as the agent intellect is, because there is no distinction. The intellect is only one unique power. Also, if the agent intellect has an activity, such an activity must be that of thinking, for no cognitive faculty has another activity besides the one after which it is named, just as sight cannot do anything else but seeing. Consequently, the intellect cannot do anything else but thinking. Logical, right? Very minimalistic account of cognition. We are basically throwing away centuries of stories of abstraction, intelligible, sensible species, and so on and so forth. So this is, I called it minimalistic account of cognition, but what it's interesting is the idea that there is no communication between what is spiritual and what is material, and such a gap cannot be bridged in any way. That the consequence, the philosophical consequence Maldonado wants to draw, is that the intellect knows the external object, what is in the world, what belongs to our world directly and without mediation. Still, it remains puzzling for me, the question of our intellect as something, as a power all the time thinking. Are we like God? Of course not. Of course not. So this will keep me occupied for a while. And then to conclude, this is my last slide. Don't be worried. Going back to Paris. So to resume, why do I study this corpus of academic manuscripts? This question has been asked to me, I don't know, many times, because of course it is a huge work that of transcribing, including texts that are still unpublished, is not at all practical nor convenient. Nowadays, it's a slow work indeed. But I think it is something that deserves to be done, and something extremely rewarding, because basically from what I have been able to reconstruct so far, these teachers, these professors were actually defending very often a certain occasionalism concerning the complex story of the relation between the soul and the body. They were dualists, they were pluralist in certain cases, and they were actually multiplying the forms, the substantial forms, although very often not explicitly. But I think that it's very interesting if we consider that actually Descartes did not, of course, René Descartes did not, of course, study in Paris, but very close to Paris at the Jesuit College of La Flèche. Well, not to mention Descartes anytime as an arrival point of everything, every time we talk about Jesuits, but I think that everything becomes more interesting if you consider that already these guys were teaching in their classrooms that very, very interesting forms of dualism and almost defending forms of innatism concerning theory of cognition. I want to say again something about methodology, the sources, and the comparisons, actually, because of course it's always scary every time I say I have a corpus of manuscripts. Usually people are bored before I talk or very interested in, it depends. I work as it follows. I am transcribing certain sources. I also am including the compendium on the metaphysics by Maldonado, the first and only record we have of Maldonado's metaphysics taught in Paris, because this is also interesting. And of course, I compare these sources with others that are more known, better known today, like it is the case of Suarez. But I mentioned Suarez, but I could have also mentioned other Jesuits like Nicola Baldelli, a Jesuit who was teaching at the Collegio Romano. The Collegio Romano, unlike the Parisian college, has been greatly studied also from the reconstruction of the philosophical teaching spreading, that they were spreading, for instance. So I include in my work also transcription, but I want to simplify this as much as possible. I don't want to do an editions all the time. In certain cases, I will really focus only on the manuscripts that seems to me to be the best. And again, I mentioned already this sort of Cartesian philosophical background, but this is something I tend to use when I want to sell it. But usually I don't think that this is really not my arrival point. I think that these doctrines, these readings are interesting in themselves, and they also help us out better to understand the 16th century, which is severely understudied still nowadays. And for me, that's all. I will stop the screen sharing, and I thank you so much for your patience.